Carol Burnett made millions laugh for 11 years in a row, but in 1977, she did something that made her entire crew cry. Critics called it brilliant, and awards poured in, but Carol never watched. Did you know that Studa Baker routine with the little dog in the window? Carol Burnett, America's Funniest Woman, was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas. Her parents, who were both alcoholics, were unable to provide for her, and her father worked many jobs. Despite this, she never once performed the sketch, claiming that it was too real. Carol had experienced the painful reality of being unwanted by the time she was a toddler. The people who should have loved her most had prioritized drinking over reading her bedtime stories. The world was filled with loneliness and uncertainty, and her mother drank excessively and was emotionally distant. Tragically, both of them would die from illnesses related to alcohol. Carol's maternal grandmother, Mabel White, took her in after her parents abandoned their efforts to raise her. The family relocated from Texas to Hollywood in 1940, but they were met with nothing but a dingy boarding house room full of other troubled souls, including addicts and the mentally ill. It was there that Carol learned early on that laughter could shield her from breaking. In the midst of all the turmoil, Carol found solace in creating a false twin sister named Karen. Karen was everything to Carol, a hopeless soul who lived on $20 a week, and Mabel gave her unconditional love, which she had never experienced before. Despite their poverty, Carol felt finally safe. It says a lot about Carol's acting and the fact that the other tenants believed she existed because she would run up the fire escape, change her hair and clothes, and reappear as Karen, who was charming and playful. The fact that these adults, many of whom were barely hanging on to themselves, believed it. Carol and her grandmother would spend more than 10% of their weekly income on movie tickets, 25 cents each, every Saturday. For a few hours, they would escape the peeling paint, screaming, and fear that pervaded their home. On screen, life sparkled, stars danced, and people danced. As the credits rolled, the focus shifted back to survival. They used to steal toilet paper from the theater bathroom because they couldn't afford it at home. Even at the age of 7, Carol understood what it was like to be hungry for more than just food. One day, while sitting in that dark theater, she overheard Johnny's story. As soon as she heard Weissmuller's iconic Tarzan yell reverberate through the room, she felt a bolt of lightning. Inspired, she went home and imitated the sound, honing her voice to an obsession with rhythm and pitch. Little did she know that she was honing the kind of breath control that takes years to perfect for singers. What started as a game quickly became her signature sound. Carol's mother had always aspired to be a writer, and Carol felt a strong sense of responsibility to fulfill her mother's dream. After graduating from high school, Carol set her sights on attending UCLA. However, she was confronted with a harsh reality when she realized she lacked the $50 needed to enroll. At first, she thought that taking an elective theater class at UCLA would be the end of her academic career. However, something strange happened. A complete stranger, the identity of whom she had never learned, stepped in and paid the amount, leaving her with enough money to change her life. Turned on its head in that room, something clicked for her. She no longer felt shy, poor, or invisible. She was hilarious, boisterous, and fully present. Her professors and classmates noticed it too. She could sing, act, and make people laugh all at once. Journalism seemed like too small a field for her. She decided to switch majors, taking a risk but finally not feeling invisible. Taking a chance on her dreams paid off promptly when, at the conclusion of her freshman year, she was named the most promising newcomer in UCLA's theater program. This was more than just a title. It was a prophecy. It validated her decision to pursue her passion, encouraged her to give her all on stage, and finally broke her habit of apologizing for wanting more than simply survival. Carol Burnett was a college junior in 1954, working as an usherette for 65 cents an hour, when her life took an unusual turn at a party in San Diego. She wasn't there, but her award opened doors, giving her better roles in school productions and support from mentors who could see she wasn't like the others. She wasn't just another hopeful actress. She had that kind of spark. Carol was about to celebrate by stuffing her purse full of hors d'oeuvres to bring home to her grandmother when an attractive stranger approached her. The man wasn't from the entertainment industry, but he was a wealthy shipbuilder from La Jolla. Carol confided in him about her Broadway dreams, but she couldn't even afford the $43 tuition at UCLA. The man then made an unbelievable offer. He gave her and her boyfriend, Don Soyan, $1,000 each, but he had 3 conditions. They couldn't reveal his identity, they couldn't spend it on anything other than transportation to New York, and if they were successful, they had to help others. He didn't want credit, so he simply said that someone had helped him in the past, and he was trying to pay it forward. His wife would later reveal that he had done similar deals for gas stations, restaurants, and people chasing after them. Carol and Don left UCLA in 1954 with $2,000 in hand. They headed east, where they checked into the Algonquin Hotel for $9 a night. Carol had never been farther than Texas, but she didn't care. They landed in the city and stayed for a while. At one point, Carol sobbed into a collect call to her family, begging her to return. Just as she was about to give up, she heard the news. A hurricane named Carol was heading up the coast. Taking it as a sign, it gave her the strength to stay. Little did she know, she soon found herself in a whole new world. Here at the rehearsal club, we were immersed in the vibrant energy of young women attempting to make it big in the arts. For $18 a week, Carol had a cot in a shared room with 4 other actresses. The space was cramped, with only one bathroom and a closet, but it was heaven on earth for us. Back home, we slept on a couch. In March 1955, Carol and the other girls put on a show called the Rehearsal Club Review and sent out invitations to agents and producers. Big names like Marlene Dietrich showed up that night, and doors started opening for Carol. Despite the lack of glamour, it was real. Carol's performance of a love song written by Ken Welch about the stiff and serious U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles became her signature. The audiences went wild, and she was invited to the Jack Paar and Ed Sullivan shows. On January 6, 1957, she stepped out onto the Sullivan stage, her knees trembling, but by the end of her set, the audience was in fits of laughter. That same August, she returned to perform the Dulles song once more, along with a parody of Puppy Love. That absurd ballad brought her fame in New York City, and she continued to grind for the next 5 years. In 1955, she had a small role on The Paul Winchell Show, playing a Once Upon a Mattress. A new off-Broadway musical was picked up for Broadway in 1959. Carol played Princess Wyford, a boisterous and awkward marsh girl who was totally unlike any fairy tale princess. The show became an instant hit, and it all started with a role that led to a brief collaboration with Buddy Hackett and Stanley. Once Upon a Mattress wasn't even meant to be a hit. It began as a small summer camp. 5 years after Carol and Don paid back the full $2,000, the mysterious loan, the millionaire never responded and remained anonymous until the very end. By this point, Carol was earning $500 per week, which felt like hitting the jackpot. Carol's performance was the deciding factor in the show's 470 performances as it traveled from theater to theater beginning in May 1959. However, when she departed from the cast in June 1960, the production collapsed within a week. Carol's replacement only managed 8 performances before it closed altogether. Then came Carol's meteoric rise to fame on The Gary Moore Show began in 1959 and continued until 1962, when she won her first Emmy. The show's lasting influence, however, lay in the lessons it taught her. For example, the live audience interactions that would come to characterize the Carol Burnett Show were modeled after Gary Moore's unrehearsed Q&A warm-ups. From 1950 to 1967, it was one of the most influential variety shows of all time, and Carol saw it as a chance to hone her timing, character, and risk-taking chops. Then, in 1962, something truly magical occurred at Carnegie Hall, but CBS was hesitant to let her do a special with Julie Andrews because, in their opinion, Andrews wasn't famous enough, while Carol was. Carol, who was already a weekly TV fixture, joked that a truck driver would probably give her a lift home after a promotional event. The show's producers, Michael Dann and Oscar Katz, took this as a sign from above, and the special Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall went on to win 3 major awards. Columbia Records even put out a soundtrack that peaked at number 85 on the charts, and Carol won numerous awards, including an Emmy and a Rose d'Or. However, all of that pales in comparison to what happened next. The Carol Burnett Show premiered on September 11, 1967, and television was forever changed as a result. Carol broke through a barrier that no one thought a woman could break, as ChatGPT said. For 11 straight seasons from September 11, 1967, The Carol Burnett Show was a phenomenon from 1967 to 1978, drawing an average of 30 million viewers each week. This wasn't just good television, it was unprecedented. The show transcended entertainment to become an event in its own right. Time magazine even named it one of the 100 greatest of all time. TV Guide ranked it at 17, and Variety at 23, demonstrating just how big it was. Not only did it break new ground in terms of viewership, but it also pioneered the practice of live comedy skits performed in front of an audience in a studio setting, a move that would later influence Saturday Night Live. Carol Burnett, who was more than just another star, was also one of the first women to host a variety show during an era when the majority of hosts were men. In an industry dominated by males, she broke new ground by allowing more women to pursue careers in comedy. The Carol Burnett Show was so consistent that it garnered an unprecedented 25 primetime Emmys during its 11 years on air. The show's 25 Emmys came from a variety of categories, including writing, music, choreography, and, of course, Best Variety Series. Not only that, but Tim Conway took home 3 for acting, and 1 for writing, and Harvey Korman won 4 for Outstanding Supporting Performance in 1969, 1971, 1972, and 1974. Carol Burnett herself won 2 Golden Globes for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical in 1977 and 1978, and the show went out on a high note by winning Best Variety Series and multiple other categories. The show had a 3-year streak of popularity, winning the People's Choice Award for Favorite Variety Program in 1975, 1977, and 1978. Cemented its position as TV royalty. Subsequent variety shows have failed miserably. However, not all was sunshine and rainbows behind the scenes. In the 7th season, Harvey Korman almost quit the show. That week, the show had the kindness of Tim Conway and the voice of Petula Clark as guests. However, Korman was in no mood during rehearsals and came across as impolite. After Friday night's taping, the irritable Carol Burnett took him aside to find out what was wrong. Korman responded brutally, saying, "I'm just not happy here." In response, he slammed the dressing room door in her face. That was the last straw, and Burnett contacted his agent to fire him. However, Korman reconsidered over the weekend and begged for another chance. Her request was specific. On Monday morning, I would like to see you skipping and whistling down the hallway at CBS. Burnett reluctantly agreed, but she did so with one condition. And that's precisely what he did. He hopped off the elevator on Monday morning while whistling and skipping, which caused Burnett to giggle uncontrollably and prompt him to have a plaque engraved for his door. Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky Corman remained. Tim Conway, the show's wild card, joined in season 10. He had a rule: never go all out in rehearsals. Instead, he saved his best bits for live tapings, even if it confused everyone else. The result? Each performance was unique and unpredictable, thanks to Conway's strategy. It was during The Elephant Story, in a family series sketch, that Conway most famously rambled on about a circus elephant. Carol Burnett, Vicki Lawrence, and Dick Van Djk did their best to remain in character, but the story just got weirder and funnier as he went on. By the end, even Vicki Lawrence couldn't hold back her laughter. With an unexpected line that made everyone on set laugh, including Conway, the show's essence was born: genuine, unscripted fun. However, not every scene was funny. In 1977, something happened that deeply affected Carol Burnett. It came from one of the. In the recurring sketch, The Gong Show, she portrayed Eunice Higgins, a woman whose hopes and dreams have been dashed due to a talent show. The judges, however, didn't share her optimism, and she instead found herself stifled by the weight of her disappointment and broken dreams. Mocker on air, the episode maintained its impact as real-life game show host Alan Luton Burnett played the part without an accent or silly movement, and by the end, the entire crew was on the verge of tears. The camera drew back slowly on Eunice's tear-streaked face as the lights dimmed. There was no music, no laughter, just heartbreak. Critics were shocked, lauded it, but Burnett never rewatched it because, as she explained in an interview with Harper's Bazaar in 2010, "I'm glad we did it," she said, "but it wasn't funny because it was based on real events and the struggles that real people face when they try to achieve their dreams while living in poverty." Carol Burnett didn't merely bring joy to audiences through her stand-up routine. She also had a significant impact behind the scenes. The sketch had a lasting impact, leading to a 1982 TV movie named Eunice and a spin-off sitcom Mama's Family. Burnett was dissatisfied with the show's direction and eventually left, but the original episode endured. She met her first husband, Don Soyan, at UCLA in 1952, and they married 3 years later in 1955. They were young, in love, and both wanted to make it big in show business. Don was born in Omaha in 1928 and had big dreams of being on Broadway. Their love story began in college when she was a freshman. Don's battles with depression and alcoholism led to his untimely death in 1990 at the young age of 62. Carol's career took off while his remained stagnant, and the strain on their marriage caused them to separate on Christmas Day, 1959, and eventually divorce in 1962. They were married in 1963 and collaborated on Carol's successful show. They had 3 daughters, Carrie Jody, Erin, and a miscarriage in 1965. Between Joe's 8 children from a previous marriage and their 3, their house was always full. He won 5 Emmys. Meet Joe Hamilton, a prominent TV producer, shortly after he produced Carol's Carnegie Hall concert in 1962. The couple won Emmys for their work on Carol's show, but their personal lives took a hit. In 1976, the National Enquirer published a false story about Carol allegedly sitting drunk at a restaurant next to Henry Kissinger. The story hit Carol hard because she had spent years fighting against alcoholism. She sued the tabloid for $1.6. Carol won the case, but after appeals, it was settled for around $200,000. It wasn't about the money, it was about clearing her name, and it changed tabloid journalism forever. The case lasted 5 years and revealed how reckless tabloids could be. A paid informant actually told the Inquirer that Carol wasn't drunk, but they ran the story anyway. Carol Burnett's daughter Carrie had a tough time controlling her drug use in the late 1970s. By the time she was 13 years old, she was abusing cocaine, mushrooms, and quaaludes. Carrie later claimed that she wanted to be her own person, so she turned to drugs. From 1976 to 1979, Carol watched her daughter deteriorate as she sent her to rehab after rehab. At one point, Carrie's sobriety at 17 years old came at a price. Carol had to make the hardest decision of her life. Carrie hated her for it. Despite Carrie's hatred, Carol persevered, saying, "You have to love them enough to let them hate you." They didn't speak for over a year, but she never gave up. Upon Carrie's return, they grew even closer. Carrie's breakout role on Fame demonstrated her talent, and she and Carol went on to co-star in movies, and even wrote a play based on Carol's life, Hollywood Arms. Tragically, Carrie passed away in 2002 from pneumonia caused by lung cancer that had spread to her. Despite feeling devastated, Carol continued, claiming, "I owed it to Carrie." Carol's second marriage had already ended in 1984, and by that point, Carrie's addiction, the pressure of their careers, and the emotional strain had worn her and Joe Hamilton down. They had sent their 2 children to separate foster care programs. Carol found love again in the late 1990s, when she met Brian Miller while performing in Long Beach. He was 23 years younger than her, but that didn't matter. They were married in 2001. Joe remained close to the family after the divorce until his death from cancer in 1991. Carol was. About 2 months later, Carrie passed away, and Brian was there to help Carol get through the worst period of her life. He pushed her to finish Hollywood Arms, and the two have remained together ever since. In the 20s, Brian and Carol took custody of Dylan, Aaron's grandson, when Aaron's youngest daughter was struggling with addiction and couldn't care for her own son. After a nightmare of 19 years, Aaron's home became unsafe for her son Dylan. In July 2020, he sent suicide threats to her children, prompting the police to step in and place her on a psychiatric hold. Shortly after, Carol filed for legal guardianship of Dylan. Within weeks, the court intervened. Carol Burnett shocked everyone with her appearance in the final season of Better Call Saul. Despite being 89 years old, her acting was as sharp as ever. In the episode, she played Marion, an elderly woman who slowly uncovered the truth about Saul Goodman. She gave temporary custody to Brian and Carol, once again stepping in to protect her family, even though it broke her heart. The show's co-creator, Vince Gilligan, later acknowledged that he had written a scene in which Saul thought about permanently silencing Waterworks as she sat silently in her kitchen using Ask Jeeves to investigate Saul's lies. What she discovered changed everything. "I trusted you." That moment was unforgettable. Saul panicked. The tension built up until she delivered a single line that crushed him. Carol Burnett's portrayal of Saul was both terrifying and brilliant. Critics hailed it as one of the most terrifying and brilliant moments in the history of the show. However, that wasn't the only occasion on which Burnett shocked audiences with her. While her work with Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt on Mad About You was successful, Burnett's portrayal of Teresa elevated the show to new heights. In 1997, she was honored with an Emmy for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series, proving that she was more than just a sketch comedian. Her scenes felt just as natural on modern sitcoms. The quieter, smarter, and more profoundly funny Burnett won the American Comedy Award for a guest role for 2 years in a row. That wasn't luck, but skill built from decades of performing in front of an audience. Her career was marked by 25 Emmy nominations, and that's not even counting the 2000s, when her voice took over. She transitioned from physical comedy to animated films, lending her voice to vibrant characters that popped on screen. Her breakout role was in 2008's Horton Hears a Who, a computer-generated adaptation of a Dr. Seuss classic. Co-starring with Jim Carrey and Steve Carell, the picture became an international smash, earning $298 million from an initial $85 million budget. In 2001, she collaborated with Reese Witherspoon, Jason Alexander, and Mary Steenburgen to voice Mrs. Hammer-Botham in The Trumpet of the Swan. These roles brought her to a new audience of young people who had never watched The Carol Burnett Show, but whose voices possessed the same charisma, humor, and warmth. Her return to. After a long hiatus from Broadway, Burnett returned in the late 1990s to star in Putting It Together, a musical revue by Stephen Sondheim. The show premiered at the Ethel Barrymore Theatre on November 21, 1999, and ran for 101 performances, including 22 previews. Burnett played the role of the wife, and she was joined on stage by legendary actors like John Barrowman, Ruthie Hinchell, and George Hearn. The show was filmed live for television and home release, capturing moments both scripted and unscripted, such as when her skirt fell during a scene and she turned it into a joke mid-performance. Even critics, who gave the overall show mixed reviews, had nothing but praise for Burnett. It was as if she had never left the stage when she hit it. Performed Sondheim's intricate music flawlessly, demonstrating her unparalleled stage presence. And just when everyone thought Carol Burnett had done it all, she made a triumphant return in 2022, this time on Apple TV+. In Palm Royale, she played the role of Norma Delacourt, a rich Palm Beach woman who spends the majority of the series in a coma until she abruptly awakens. The role required a great deal of her, but she managed it. Burnett, who was 91 years old at the time of her nomination, became the oldest female Emmy nominee for her work in a comedy series. The role required her to not only perform physical comedy, but also to create a kind of gibberish dialogue to mimic someone just regaining speech. The play debuted on March 20, 2024, and went on to receive 11 nominations. Despite having an all-star ensemble that included Kristen Wiig, Ricky Martin, Laura Dern, Allison Janney, and Ricky Martin, Burnett was the standout. New audiences were introduced to a performer who had been captivating audiences for more than 7 decades.